WIC Radio Live, David Ellenbogen here. If you've been listening to shows sequentially, you might know that the producer Mari Tanaka and I just got back from Big Ears Festival. Unbelievable event, so really mind-blowing. Discovered so many new artists, connected with a million others, and we went to talk one morning with Joe Boyd, which that's one of my favorite episodes. I hope you check out the interview with him and check out his books. Absolutely legendary producer. And he was speaking with Ashley Katz, the producer of Bonnaroo and of Big Ears Festival. And they spent so much time discussing the influence of George Wein, who we'll be hearing from today. George Wein is perhaps the most influential of all music producers, at least in America and at least in jazz. He started music festivals, actually. Can you believe it? Before him, there was only classical music festivals. And in 1954, he started the Newport Jazz Festival. In 1958, he started the Newport Folk Festival and started the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival, Jazz Fest. He was the first to bring Billie Holiday to Europe. He brought Miles Davis out of retirement. He booked 1,000 dates with Duke Ellington. He jammed with Louis Armstrong, and I don't know, it goes on and on and on. And I was actually very, very lucky to spend a lot of time with George Wein. He was one of my first bosses, and I learned lessons that I'm still leaning from. I mean, just amazing things he would say. A festival is an illusion. Something I still think about. And many others. And I interviewed him. I'm not sure when. The file says it's from 2010. And I never put it out. I think I played it live on the airways of WKCR once. And it was almost lost to the sands of time. It was just labeled, I wasn't labeled George Wein, I just found it was labeled GTW. And the reason I never put it out as a podcast is I was always a little embarrassed. It was a sweltering day in his apartment on the east side, and his assistant asked if I wanted to turn off the air conditioner, and I said it was fine. So there's this like air conditioner on in the background, so it's not super pro recording, but maybe it was the right thing to do, because we spoke for a while, and he gets into his stories with Duke and with Miles, and I don't know, should I ruin it? The guy basically integrated New Orleans. It was still segregated, and he through Jazz Fest, he actually ended their policy of segregation. He tells that story and much more. So anyway, at least 16 years back, here is me with the legendary producer, George Wein, at his apartment. I just turned it on, and he was speaking somewhat about the influence of some... I'm going to play, just deliver the whole thing. So, yeah, he was starting to talk about different jazz critics when I turned on the recording, and then we get into the conversation proper. But anyway, I hope you fight through the sound quality. This is a truly historic document. Literally from the horse's mouth, from the stage of Newport Jazz Festival, and beyond. So enjoy, and thanks for listening.
I'm gonna sit right down and write myself a letter and make believe it came from you.
With him, he was the one that Benassier was a great pioneer, because he was one of the early people that established the African American culture in jazz, and that, recognition of it, and that jazz was an American art form. A very important figure in jazz criticism. They were all pioneers. All the great early jazz critics were European, not American. People that wrote about jazz. Robert Goffin was Belgian, and there were guys in England writing about jazz, and guys in Italy writing about jazz. Long before we had Downbeat, but Downbeat was a big band. They weren't writing about, the small bands, and when you read the jazz was basically in African American music, all the roots. I mean, they were writing about Benny Goodman and Tommy Dorsey and Glenn Miller and Louis Armstrong and Jimmy Lunceford, but I mean, that was not their mission in life, Downbeat,
Mm-hmm. So when you were a kid, we're on now, just so you know. When you were a kid, the jazz music that made it out to you, was that more of the Benny Goodman and Artie Shaw stuff, or?
Well, they were definitely a major influence, but at the same time, at a very early age, I was listening to Cab Calloway and Chu Berry and Duke Ellington. I went to hear Duke Ellington by myself, one of the great experiences of my life. And it was all before the war, while I was in high school. I used to go to hear those bands, so I became interested in small band jazz very early, even though big band jazz was a big influence on me.
And
It was the improvisation in small bands that
got you excited.
Yeah.
And the material that you started playing, that was the World War II, the music of the popular music of World War II?
Well, we actually started before that.
Before that.
I mean, we were playing, the Glenn Miller's In the Mood and Erskine Hawkins' Tuxedo Junction. They were back in the 30s.
So you're playing dances.
What?
You're playing for people to dance at first.
Yeah, I had a band when I was 13 years old. That was 1938, and we got the stock arrangements. We'd rehearse in my cellar, and and somebody every so often would want to hire a kid band like they do nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
We'd make $1 a night or $2. We didn't work very often, it was a big thing. Usually some relative said, why don't you get your band and come and play for us, because they could get us cheap. They could get us for nothing if they asked.
And I've seen some posters that you had, and it said George Wein plays, I think it was danceable jazz.
That was a little later. That was when I was with Edmund Hall Quartet in 1949. I was playing at the Savoy Club in Boston. Edmund Hall was Louis Armstrong's clarinet player, great New Orleans clarinet player, a fantastic clarinet player. And he was from New Orleans, and we had a quartet in Boston. And I became without realizing, the spokesperson for Edmund. He would want something done. He said, would you ask Steve, the boss, And they wanted to rehire us, and Edmund asked, can we get a raise? So I went to Steve. He said, no, you can't give us a raise. Steve Connolly. And I said, well, if you can't give us a raise, all of a sudden my mind was working. I said, why don't you give us one Saturday night a month off, and we'll pay for a replacement. one night, I don't know, I said Saturday night, one night. So maybe we can pick up another gig and make some money. And that's when I came up with the idea. I had a friend of mine who was an agent who used to come in the club, and he said, I think I can book your band in colleges. So we came up with the idea of danceable jazz, and we played 3 or 4 gigs. And we used to get $750 a night, which is big money because the whole band, the whole quartet was getting $180, $280, $300 for the whole quartet. The rhythm section was getting $60 and the leader was getting $120 for 7 days and Sunday afternoon. So when we got $750, we gave the guys a nice taste. Edmund and I split. He got the major portion, but I got the second portion. And we played Dartmouth, Winter Carnival, we played Middleborough, we did a couple of other dates, I can't remember. And that was my first experience as an entrepreneur of any kind, as a manager or a producer, whatever you want to call it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I had never done anything like that, you know, and so that was a taste of the industry that I ended up joining full force.
And what do you think, what quality about you made you the guy that did the negotiating out of the rest of the fellas?
I don't know. I never knew. I mean, I always remember, I was always sort of a leader. I always talked when I was 13. I was the one that called the other kids to organize the band.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and when I wanted to play baseball, I called all the kids in the neighborhood, let's have a baseball team. I was always an organizer. It was just a natural thing with me. I wasn't trying to be a boss or anything. I just wanted to do things. I mean, my mind still thinks of things to do, never stops. Never stops. I have some meetings this week with the jazz gallery people. I want to help them, and my mind is thinking already how to help them, you know what I mean? And it never stops thinking in your mind. That's just the way you are. I never had any motivation, even when I was doing the Edmund Hall thing. I never thought I was going to be in the music business for the rest of my life. I was still in college. I was a senior in college. I was playing 7 nights and Sunday afternoon while I was getting my degree. But I never said, well, now I'm going to be a musician, or now I'm going to... Never entered my head. I just was doing what I was doing. I don't know. People ask me that question all the time. I never had a motivation to put on a jazz festival. Somebody said, we'll do something in Newport, the Lords. I said, gee, there's no such thing as a jazz festival. Why don't we do a jazz festival? I mean, I guess the only time I had motivation was when I didn't have a festival and I had to take over people like Thelonious Monk and work with them. And I said, I want to go to Japan. I'll book Thelonious in Japan. So that was a big risk, but I did it. It was a major move in my life. But I did it because I wanted to go to Japan.
You know, I read, what's his name, Joe Boyd? This guy worked with you for a while. He wrote that he thought some of your motivations for bringing some of these people on tour through Europe was so you could eat your way through the Michelin Guide.
Yeah, same thing, yeah. Yeah, well, Monk said, Monk was the one that said it. He booked me, and I booked him in Lyon one night. We had a concert. I didn't book him in Lyon. We had a concert in Lyon. And that's right near Vienna, the famous 3-star restaurant for the Pyramid. It's about 20 miles away. I said, Thelonious, I won't be with you at the concert tonight. I'm going to have a eat in the restaurant. It's why Mark Lum's a bitch. That's why you booked me here in the first place. For me, it was always try to do things, have fun while you're doing them, and increase the scope of your experience. Everything. I was always interested in that, you know.
So what was the, how did you make the move from playing music to starting Storyville, the club in Boston?
Well, it was all related, because when the woman or the guy that owned the Savoy, the woman owned it, Steve was the manager. She said to me, she offered me a deal to, why don't you build the bands that come in here and bring me, you get me the musicians and I'll make you the leader. Not that so I'd bring in names from New York, Wild Bill Davis and Vic Tiggins and Joe, you know. Then we'd build a band around them. And so that was still while I was in college. And then somebody said to me, when I graduate, why don't you open your own club? I'm a lawyer. I said, I never thought of opening my own club. I said, but I have no money. How to open up a club? He says, don't worry about it. You lease a room from a hotel, make a deal with a hotel and lease a room, which is what I did. I never bought a club or paid. I had $5,000 that I had been saved for my education, which I didn't use because of the GI Bill. And so that was the money I had when I went in business. 6 months later, it was $20,000 in debt, and that was it for the rest of my life.
So, at this club, you were bringing in, well, people like Billie Holiday and
Well, the first year was mostly a Dixieland tradition with Bob Wilbur.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I brought in different, we played mostly traditional Eddie Condon style jazz, you know, mostly.
And was that because the drinks would be flowing and you'd make more of a profit, or? Well,
no, I mean, I wanted to have a set band. We didn't
mm-hmm.
change every week. The band stayed 6 weeks, 5 weeks. I mean, we paid, band cost me $800, $900 a week, you know, I mean, and we had some good days, but you could see there was going nowhere. Then somebody, an agent in New York, calls me and says, why don't you get the web to book George Shearing? This was the fall of 1951, because I started in the fall of 1950. And $2,500 for George Shearing. Geez, that's a lot of money. I said, I didn't know much about George Shearing. I knew he had a record called September in the Rain and Jumpin' with Symphony Sid, but I didn't even know that much about that. I went to New York to hear him, and I could see that the place was crowded. I put a little ad in August, opening at Storyville, September 10th or whatever it was. The place, the calls that started coming in, and what it ended up that I made $7,000 in 10 days with George Shearing. I said, I'm going to be rich, man. I mean, this is incredible. I'm going to be rich. So I went out and booked everybody I loved. Billie Holiday, Art Tatum, and they did not do business like George Shearing. And that's when I was $20,000 in debt, you see. I booked everybody, but then I started booking by the week, you see, because they all out-of-town artists. So that's how things developed. Just by, I won't say by chance, because we had set up, I got a call from an agent because he knew I had a nightclub, you see, and he figured maybe it'd generate some business. And he didn't have anybody else take George Shearing in Boston. So he called me, and he turned out doing the right thing, and I did the right thing, at least at that time.
And this is a kind of balancing act you've had to continue, which is booking the artists that you love, like an Art Tatum, and booking an act like the Kingston Trio or something like that that would make you the big money.
Well, that was later. That was 10 years, 9 years later. I mean, this was still 1951 and 52 and 53. It was very early. I was booking. I booked Billy Taylor and Barbara Carroll. I booked Ethel Waters. I booked a lot of different things that were. I'd go to Cafe Society in New York and book the artists that were working there. I wasn't into the more commercial names. A little later on, I started to book the Four Freshmen, and then I booked people like Dakota Staten because they had a hit record, and now I'm beginning to realize that some people did business, and that the fact they were great artists didn't necessarily mean they were going to do business.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where I learned about the more commercial side of the industry, you know. If they had a hit record, they sold tickets, people came. If they didn't have a hit record, they just the loyal cult fans came to see them.
And can you talk a little about the atmosphere that you tried to cultivate in Storyville?
Oh, we had a good club. First of all, we couldn't charge a lot of money. It was because nobody had any money. It was no cover, no minimum. We put a music charge of $2 on. People went crazy, you know. Beers were 60 cents, and scotches were 90 cents. Then they went up a little bit, but never. Maybe scotch went up to $1.25, and beer went up to 90 cents, you know. But even right to the end, in the whole 50s, when the club went from 1950 to 1960, we eventually put in a music charge. But I mean, we didn't do any business. I mean, I'd open up with, say, I bring in a group like Terry Gibbs or Buddy DeFranco with it. We'd have 20 people on a Monday night, you know, and I booked Dinah Washington. She opened on a Friday and Saturday and Sunday, and then was supposed to be there the following Thursday. Nobody came. I said to Dinah, I says, this is terrible. If we didn't have this many people Saturday night, Monday night, you'll be singing to empty tables. So she left and gave me, you know, let me out of 4 days' pay on her, you know, which was, it was very, but yet when we brought in Sarah Vaughan or Ella Fitzgerald or Count Basie, we were packed. They were popular. I brought in Ellington and Louis Armstrong. They did business, but not packed.
Mm-hmm.
Stan Getz, Miles Davis, did okay a little bit, but groups like Blakey and Horace Silver, very little, you know. And somehow or other I stayed, every year I was in the hole $4,000, $5,000, $6,000, and I closed in the summer. It was always enough. Occasionally a Saturday night would be packed. You know, you get the feeling that there was some life there. But I used to borrow $4,000 or $5,000 every year to pay my bills. And you know, people say, "How did you stay in business?" Then I started doing this outside of the club and earning a little money there.
Doing what, booking or?
No, I started the Newport Jazz Festival.
Oh.
And so at first I didn't make, but then I at least drew a salary out of that for a little bit till I took control of it myself. But that was in the 60s already, because until 61, it was until 1960. It was part of the old nonprofit thing that was set up by Louis Lorillard in Newport. I was just an employee. The fact that I created the festival, they gave me the opportunity to create it. But after the riot of 1960, which incidentally there was a big article in the New York Times, Mark Myers went up there and did some some research on it to write about Newport. And he met some of the old policemen that were there. And said, we never had a problem with George Wein. We loved the music. He said, there was all kids coming on the outside. We never had a problem at the festival. The festival was what drew people to town, but there were thousands of people outside that they were there to have a good time.
Right.
The ones that the police asked me to keep the concert going until 2 o'clock in the morning so they'd clean up what was happening outside. Next day, riot at Newport Jazz Festival. Well, no riot at the Newport Jazz. Riot in the town of Newport, but not at the Newport Jazz Festival. And
well, that was later, in the 70s.
That was a totally different thing.
Right.
That was in 71. That was music should be free. And there's still no riot at the festival. There were 20,000 people in the park that night. And I made an announcement that kids are breaking the fence down. We have to have the concert. We're going to have to cancel the rest of the concert. Please go home. 20,000 people filed out without a problem, and the kids were left with an empty field. And the cops cleaned them out the next morning because they were sleeping on the side of the hill. They were also stoned. That was the drug age. You know?
Mm-hmm.
The riot was a beer riot. You know, kids throwing beer cans at the cops. From 1960 to 1971, the whole culture changed. Instead of being a beer culture, it was a drug culture, you know, as far as the intoxicants for kids, you know.
Well, I want to jump back a little bit. There's some great artists who played Storyville, but they never made it to Newport. And the one that's jumping out at me is Charlie Parker. And maybe you could tell me about his stint.
Charlie Parker and Art Tatum, they both died before I could get them there. They weren't there the first year, and they died before the second year. I think they both died in either late 54 or early 55, you know.
But you in your autobiography, you mentioned some interactions with Charlie Parker where you had been discussing how some musicians don't even show up to the gig.
Oh, that was just a funny thing. I mean, we were talking at the bar. The bar we had, it was in front of the main room, and it was sort of a little separated. We was in the bar talking about musicians, how because of what was happening with drugs and everything, and they didn't show up, and you know, and you couldn't always talk about things, and I guess the next thing you know, Bird pops into the room from the he says, "You're absolutely right, Mr. Terrell." And I'm looking because he's the one responsible for the whole thing. You know? I mean, it was just funny, but I didn't have a lot of interaction with Bird. I mean, I liked Bird. The thing I liked about Bird most was because he played in my club, I learned to realize how great he was. You know, that was the most important interaction. Because I was still a Johnny Hodges fan, you know, back then in 1952. Until Bird came into my club, and I listened to him every night, and I said, hey, you know, then one time he actually came up on the stage and played with my band. At that time, it wasn't a story band, it was the Mahogany Hall All-Stars. And I had Doc Cheatham and Vic Dickinson in the band, and we had jam sessions in the afternoon. This was 1953, probably, or 50, the year before he died. And I said, Bird, come up and play the blues with us. We were going to play Royal Garden Blues. And he came up, and man, he started to play. And everybody in the band just looked like they couldn't believe what they were hearing, you know. I mean, it was just so fantastic, you know. So that was the other funny story was Bird was a very friendly guy, you know. And he'd sit in the bar and talk to people in the bar, and people would buy him drinks, you know. And so there was a guy, there was a bookie, he actually booked numbers. It wasn't my bar, it was the upstairs bar in a hotel where the musicians stayed, which was the same hotel that I had my club in, but it was a different bar. And this guy liked talking to Bird, and they said, let me a drink, and so he ordered 3 drinks, tells the bartender, give me my regular. And so he bought the guy 3 drinks. The bill came, there were 12 drinks. So I said, yeah, I bought 3 drinks to the guy. What is this, 12 drinks? He said, the guy told me to give him his regular. He drinks doubles. So those are a few those are true stories, you know, not apocryphal stories.
Right. From the horse's mouth. And you also got to play with some other great people. You got to play with LesterYoung.
Well, that was a real playing, because I played a week with Lester, you know, and that was in my book about. You're gonna play piano, Prez? Yeah, Prez, I know your tunes, I think. If you say so, Prez. And he kept saying he wouldn't get on the stage. I said, what do you want to play, Prez? Whatever your feelings, Prez. You call me Prez, I'm calling him Prez. How about Pennies from Heaven, you know? And, it's cool, Prez. I said, what tempo? You got a tempo, man? Whatever your feelings, Prez. I said, what key? He says, I'm voulez, Prez, you know. Key is C, all right? Yeah. How about okay, Prez? Play the chorus. And I said, he wouldn't get on the stage. I said, Prez, you want to have another helping, man? I played another chorus. He says, have another helping, man. Prez. I had to play 3 choruses. Then he says, you're not going to be all right, Prez. And he got up on the stage. And I said, oh, I went like this.
That was your
I was
audition.
playing very simple things, you know. I wasn't playing bebop. And he was happy to have a simple piano player behind him, because he had been playing with bebop. Prez was not a bebop player. He came out of the swing era. You know?
Mm-hmm.
The beboppers loved him because he was the best saxophone player out of the swing era, he and Coleman Hawkins. But they did not play bebop per se like Sonny Stitt or somebody like that, you know.
And he's a guy, very original character, as you're showing. Kind of had his own language.
Yeah, you know, I don't think anybody remembers Prez, anybody that's around. Roy Haynes, but Roy Haynes is not very good at. He worked with Prez a lot. But the poetry that Prez had in his speech, everybody had a, you know, like Buck Clayton was Lady Clayton, you know, and Vic Diggins was Lady Victoria, you know what I mean? He called everybody, like Lady Day. Everybody had a thing. And we would be playing we want to play in Indiana. He said, let's play Indianapolis, man. Now, Indianapolis meant Indiana at an upscale, fast tempo. And he would turn to the bass player when he was playing, say, have another helping, and then we'll follow the swallow back home. He was the swallow, and follow him as they take it out, you know. I mean, everything, you know, I wish I could remember more of his poetry, but everything was, he had something for everybody and everything, you know. He would be telling us about how he was before the judge, and he was getting a divorce from his wife, who was gay. The wife was gay. And I forget what he said. There can only be one Mr. Young in the family. Or it can't be Mr. and Mr. Young, something like that, you know what I mean?
Wow.
So it was fun, and the main thing is that the most enjoyable thing, we were swinging one night, and he's happy, and he said, yeah, while the music, we've got to get Lady Grants to record our little quintet. Well, I felt so good about that. We never did record, but I felt so, he's talking about recording his whole little quintet because he's having fun, you know. We were playing the old tunes that he played with Basie, you know, and the old standards. And he was back home, you know.
So I think some people attribute the word cool, that he was the one who coined that.
I don't recall that. I mean, the people, they all had their languages. I mean, Joe Jones had his language, the Vance and the Ding Ding, everything was. I think Prez was the beginning of the idiosyncratic way of musicians talking. You know, that everything had a double entendre to what they were saying. You remember Dexter Gordon in the movie, the way they talked, and Monk was like that. You know, 1 and 1 is 3. You know, I mean, and you had to figure out why 1 and 1 was 3. You know. And,
have you figured it out?
No, I never figured it out. I mean, Monk had all those little things going, and a little game they played with everybody. Like their own music was supposed to be different. They wanted their own language to be a little different. The kids are doing that today with the rap language. You know.
So other characters that you really were interacting with in those days and later, I think a key one to talk about would be Louis Armstrong. So when did you first...
Well, Louis came to the club in we were still in the Buckminster, so it must have been 1953 that he came. And he wasn't playing trumpet at that time. He had a bad lip, so Trummy was playing the lead. LesterYoung was on trombone. But Pomps was there, and I mean, he was singing, and I remember, and he was his whole personality. And so we decided to have a tribute to Pops. And I have that on tape, by the way. I think I have a disc of it, which really should be in the Louis Armstrong's archives. I've been meaning to give it to the Louis Armstrong archives. And we called Tallulah Bankhead, and we asked if she could come. We did that. We got somebody from Harvard, and we really because we always felt, even in those days, the importance of Louis Armstrong and what he meant to the world, and the fact that he created the jazz language, and that, and we were making this a very academic type award, and it was very, and we got Tallulah to make a tape, and she won this wonderful speech that Miss Louis Armstrong, along with Charles Chaplin, and you know, I mean, and we have that on I have it on a disc. It's not on a tape; it's an old disc. And then this professor from Harvard gets up to, I forget who it was, I have it all. And Louis said, thank you very much, ladies. You remind me of a story, you know. And he starts telling a dirty story, about how every day I went to the restaurant, I wanted a hamburger with cheese, you know. And I'm just, so I went in every day for the same thing. And one day I went in there and I was in the waitress says to me, we don't have what you want. I just scratched what you like. He said, well, you go wash your hands and bring me. And he's telling that story, and man, I mean, this is a very serious thing, you know. I just scratched what you like. Where you go wash your hands.
He was an earthy guy.
Yeah, he was an earthy guy. But I grew fairly, you know, Pops played another time with me when we were at the Copley Square. He played twice in Storyville. And he opened the next night in Providence. And it's either Marty Napoleon or Teddy Napoleon. One of the brothers was there, and he got sick, and they didn't have a piano player, and they called me at 6 or 7 o'clock at night, will you come down and play piano with Bob's tonight? I said, well, I come down and play piano. I had Shelley Mann opening at my club that night. I couldn't have cared less, man. I got in a car and drove to Providence. I broke all the records to play with Louis that night. And I was pretty bad. That was not very good because I didn't know all the tunes, you know. I mean, I was just faking. When he played something I knew, I started to play, but my ear wasn't that good that I would have been able to do it better. But I played with him that whole night, and he'd look at me every so often. And then I got close to him a little later when we did the movie, you know, the film on Louis.
Yeah, you made that was in 1970.
That was
right?
1970, yeah.
Did he ever push that Swiss Chris? He was kind of a big fan of...
He had little cards showing him sitting on a toilet. You know? He never talked about, I think one day I asked him something. He said, are you Swiss Chris? I said, how does it act right? He says, as soon as I take it, I'm straight, man.
And another Titan that came through the club, and you had a lot of interaction with Duke Ellington.
Well, Duke and I became fairly close because I used to hang out with him at night up in his room while he'd be on the phone composing, but I used to just love to be around him. I mean, I worshiped Duke Ellington. I worshiped all these guys. I mean, Louis and those two in particular. I mean, they really meant a lot to me. But you know, and we Duke, I could talk a little bit about music and you know.
He was an intellectual.
What?
He was an intellectual in that way?
Not really an intellectual, but he was interested in his music. And you could ask him questions about it. I can't remember exactly. I should take some of the conversations I had. But, I mean, he'd want ice cream at 2 o'clock in the morning. I'd ride down to the all-night drugstore and get him ice cream and bring it back to him, you know. He was one of the last of the ice cream. We used to rent 3 rooms in the hotel for him because he always had 2 ladies somewhere that he was, in the middle of the night he'd go one and then go to another, and then he kept all his ladies happy, you know what I mean?
Wow, while composing at the same time.
Yeah, it was just part of a way of life, And I became very close later because I did his tours. I toured him in Europe and in Asia and all over the world, like South America. And Duke played. I got a book on the life of Duke Ellington, Every Day in the Life of Duke Ellington, written by a Danish guy, but it was in English. And somewhere or other he got the logs from Glaser's office of every day in the life of Duke Ellington. It's date by date, where he was, year by year, where he was, when he played Newport played. And I could pick out the date I first heard him in the Roseland Ballroom in Boston when I was a kid. That's when I first heard him. And I found out that in the last 20 years of his life, Ellington and I worked together, or he worked for me, or I set up tours, 365 days. So 1/20th of his life was involved in something that I was doing.
Wow.
The last 20 years of his life. And
You relate one story where he comes and visits you and Joyce, and he enters through the front door, but he seems to leave through the back window.
not the back one. We had a back door that went out onto another street. And he comes. I said, "That's nice, Duke. He's coming to see us, have a drink. I'm celebrating my birthday. I'm 46.
Your birthday.
His birthday.
His birthday.
46, he says. Then he says, sort of sadly, turn it around, I'm 64. He didn't want to be 60. He didn't want to get old. And after he sits there, and we talk for a little while, and you're going to have, who's going to have his Hodges back with the band, or what, that kind of conversation. I don't remember what it was. He says, do you have a back door here? Do I have a back door? I said, yeah. Well, he says, okay. I showed him where it went out on as the apartment was on Central Park West, but on 65th Street there was a side door. We were on the first floor. And he says, bye, I'll see you. So I don't know who was sitting in the car waiting for him out front, you know what I mean? But
They were still waiting.
they were used to waiting for him, so they probably waited until 3 o'clock in the morning and then decided to go home with him. Hey, the other life of a lot of people is a very fascinating life. You have another life, David?
Sometimes I feel that way. Sometimes I feel like I have a few. I think you might have a couple.
Over the years, not now, but over the years, who knows?
So, Duke, you also played a very big role professionally, as you're saying, I guess a year of his life, but there were some key moments. Obviously, the most important one was the one that he says the day he was born was in Newport in 56, the comeback concert.
The two of the three major events of three American icons happened on my watch. Dylan going electric, Miles in 1955, when he made his comeback, and then Duke in 1956, when he made the cover of Time magazine, and that was the crescendo diminuendo crescendo blues. Paul Gonzalez played a 27-man chorus.
And where were you at this time when he's playing that chorus?
I was on stage. I mean, I was standing right on stage, and not before that, I was, to the side. And I mean, the thing I remember about that evening is that Duke was close enough to me to put a call into me on Thursday night at a party at Louis Lorillard's house. And he says, "What's happening up there?" "Well, everybody's here." I said, "What are you going to play?" He said, "Well, we got the menu, the medley. We're going to do the medley. We'll do a couple of other things. I'm working on a couple of new things." And I says, "Edward," and I call him. I was one of the few people that called him. "I am working my fingers to the bone to perpetuate the genius of Ellington. And I'm not getting any help from you. I said, you better be coming here swinging." He was in a studio recording the next day. And that's when they went over the Newport Suite, which wasn't a big hit. But he wrote a Newport, but then somehow or other they picked out the Diminuendo and Crescendo and Blue. Somebody that it's an old number, but they've been doing it a little bit with Desmond, not a regular thing, not Desmond, with Gonzalez. And it just took off. And Ellington felt, as Paul was supposed to play probably 6, 8 choruses and get a feeling. And Ellington saw what was happening with the crowd. They were getting into it. He kept them going and kept them going, kept them going. 27 choruses. It was a real happening. That was the first time people left their seats. They came forward, and I was a little concerned once he finished that number. I was saying, I was trying to get Duke to quit. It's on the tape. And he was in his glory. Man, it was the greatest night he'd had in years. I mean, there's this 12,000 people out there cheering and yelling, and they want more and more. But what he did was very smart to bring the, it's all on the record, he brought Johnny Hodge out to play a ballad. That brought the crowd down, but then he kept him, and he ended up with a drum solo. He played 2 more numbers. I'm yelling, "Duke, that's it, finish." He wouldn't finish. But he had the crowd under control. It was okay.
All right, so let's talk about the other two watershed moments there. How about, where was Miles Davis's career before?
Well, Miles Davis's career is in ashes. I hadn't even put him on the festival. And this was 1955, and the second year of the festival, and it made all this news the first year. I was in a club in New York, and Miles wasn't working there. He was in the back of the club, big club, Basin Street East or something like that. And I'm walking out, and Miles says, "Hey, you're going to have a jazz festival again up in Newport?" I says, "Yeah, Miles." He says, "You can't have a jazz festival without me." I says, "You want to be in a festival?" Miles? "You can't have it." Just kept repeating, "You can't have a jazz festival." So I said, "Okay, I'll call Jack. I'll set up." Jack Whittemore was his agent. So he didn't have a band. He wasn't advertised. So I had Monk and Jerry Mulligan, and they didn't have bands. I brought them up as singles. Mm-hmm. And I put together this group with Monk and Jerry Mulligan, and I got Connie Kay and Percy Heath to play with them because the Modern Jazz Quartet was there. And I forget whether Zoot Sims was there or there was somebody else there. You should know that. And Miles and Monk, they had, they weren't on the same musical beam. But but they played around midnight, and we had a bad sound system that night. Wasn't very good. The only one that came through was Miles. He put the bell of his horn right in the microphone. It came through clear as a bell. The most beautiful thing you ever heard.
Mm. Playing
Monk's tunes. And Miles comes off the stage, and I'm right standing there. I said, beautiful, Miles. Just tell Monk he plays the wrong changes around midnight. I said, Miles, he wrote the song. And he told Monk, later on he told Monk that he played the wrong changes. But everybody ran up to see Miles. That's when George Avakian signed him to Columbia, you know, and that was when he started his comeback, you know.
Wow.
He still had albums to do for whatever label it was, Prestige or whatever it was, you know.
And you had a long and varied relationship with Miles.
Well, we, you know, with a lot of musicians, you have to gain their trust because basically they don't trust you to start with, you know, because they'd all been, particularly in those days, they'd played clubs all over and then didn't do business, they didn't get paid, you know, they'd go, I mean, they didn't trust people, particularly the black musicians. White musicians were just as bad, but I mean, they really had been, you really had to earn trust, and you never knew how to earn trust. I mean, you couldn't say, I'm a nice guy, I mean, don't worry about it, I'll take care of that. It didn't mean anything. So with Miles, we were in, I'd set up a tour of Europe, which was very difficult for me because he was, I have a letter that I wrote to him that's in my files. I think it was in my book, I put the letter in. You know, and so he went to Europe for me, but he wasn't happy. And he was supposed to play in Barcelona, and he went to Barcelona. And it was a double concert there, which wasn't uncommon in those days. And he had signed a contract to do a double concert in Barcelona. And he gets there, he said, I'm not going to do a double concert. I wasn't there, I was in Paris. And Charlie calls me from Paris, from Barcelona. He was road manager for Miles.
Charlie Bourgeois.
His Miles won't play the 2 concerts. He wants more money. So Charlie puts Miles on the phone. I said, Miles, I don't have any more money. I said, I'm going home, tell Charlie to give me, buy tickets. I said, Miles, I don't have a gun. I said, you want your tickets? I told Charlie to give him the tickets, and he went home. But meanwhile, this whole thing had occurred because I had paid Miles by check in Paris before he went to Barcelona. So he thought he was paid, right? He had a check. So I was flying home on a Saturday, and that was the night Miles was supposed to play in Barcelona. In those days, when you came in, if there was a balcony, you could look at the people who were coming in to pick up their baggage. You can't do that now. And I see that there's a plane from Barcelona. Joyce was with me coming in right after us. And who walks through there but Miles? I says, motherfucker. I mean, I could see he didn't play. He left those people at Barcelona hanging, which they eventually did a pretty good thing. And Miles had his group stayed there. And so the people in Barcelona put the group on, so it wasn't a total, because that was a very great group. I forget, I think Herbie and them all in a group.
Oh, okay.
You know, so they put that group on and they played. So I go to the bank at 9 o'clock Monday morning to stop payment on the check. I paid him Thursday night in Paris. Miles calls me on Wednesday. He said, why'd you stop the jet? I says, why didn't you play the gig? He says, fuck you. Hangs up. Never had a problem with my It's total trust after that. You know what I mean? Because I wouldn't let him push me. You know, he knew that I was willing. The people in Barcelona never forgave me for years. They did eventually, because I'm a big hero in Barcelona now. But I was just there, spent 4 days there. You never saw such publicity. But for years, they said, well, they would have paid Miles for the. They didn't want to lose us. They would have. People will do that. They buckle under. That's why the musicians do that. Every so often. They don't do it now, but they used to do it a lot. Miles did it on the last concert he played. The very last concert, it was at Hollywood Bowl. And we had 2 concerts, one with, what's the name, at Jones Beach. I was partners with what's his name, the promoter in New York, you know, the old.
Oh, yeah, I do.
Yeah, at Jones Beach, he did. And the other was the Hollywood Bowl for the Los Angeles Philharmonic. Well, we had a festival at the Jones Beach, so I call, I think of his name, and I said, Miles wants more money. He says, well, what do you think? I said, I don't want to pay him. I said, I'm consistent. I said, you got Winton on that show, you got Nina Simone, you got 4 artists on there. Just put up a sign and say, Miles Davis will not appear tonight, and anybody wants a refund before they go in, give them the refund, and nobody will want it. They all want to see everybody. Well, sure enough, that's exactly what happened, and we didn't play Miles. But the people in the Hollywood Bowl, they said, we can't, he's it. He's the night. We cannot do it. So I went up to his room. I said, Miles, they're willing to pay you. I gave him cash, whatever it was, $10,000, $20,000 difference, you know. Probably making $40,000 for the night. He wanted more because he knew it was an outdoor concert. He didn't realize so many people. That's his story, you know. So I gave him the money. He played the concert, and a few weeks later he went in the hospital and never came out. You know, that was his last concert. He was Miles right up until the end.
Yeah. And you had, he'd given you some paintings of his.
Yeah, I have 2 paintings of his right here in the apartment, you know. Now, we were very close at the end, you know, and then he gave me a painting once, and I called him up and I said, Miles, you should see a painting. I had it framed. I paid $600 to have it framed. Calls me a few weeks later, a month later, I want my painting back. I said, what do you mean you want your painting? You gave it to me. He says, no, I want my painting. You can bring my painting. He just repeats himself when he says it. So I give it back. He's having an exhibition of his paintings. Paintings up there, $15,000. I go to him, I said, at least you could have paid me the $600 I paid for the framing. I said. So the next time I saw him was in Paris. And that was the year he died, you know, before, because he was doing that thing he was on tour for me, but he was doing a thing at Montreal where he played with Gil Evans and conducting. What's his name was playing behind him, so that Miles couldn't, if he couldn't play the notes, what's his name, could play him, the guy that plays Miles all the time now. And so we had dinner in Paris. He brought me another painting to replace the one that he took back. No, we had very touching moments.
Yeah, I even saw that you have a picture a slide of yours has a picture of you and James Baldwin and Miles.
Yeah, I took those photos at his house. I took photos of Miles and Jimmy at Miles's house. I have them on the wall, and I don't know if you've seen my photos.
Yeah, no, I went through them with you once.
Yeah.
So then our other watershed moment was the Dylan concert. I'm working you hard, I see.
Well, that I was not involved with getting into it. I was just involved in it while it was happening. I didn't know that Dylan was rehearsing with the band or whatever group it was he was working with. And I didn't know he was going to go electric. And when he went, it was so loud for the folk festival, all acoustic, you know. I mean, that's all documented in my book. You know, you have that story where I went up to him. I said, "You gotta go up with your sing an acoustic song, Bob. They're gonna be a riot." So I don't have a guitar. Everybody have a guitar for Dylan. 20 guitars went up in the air, you know. And he went back and sang "It's All Over Now, Baby Blue." But that's one of the most historic moments in American music. I was the one that sent him back to do an acoustic song.
And in your interpretation, that the big thing was that people were booing when he went electric. So do you think it was...
Well, the pro-electric refused to say that. The people, there was a lot of booing. I mean, there was a disruption in the crowd. They were really confused. They came to hear Blowing in the Wind. They came to hear Bob and his beautiful songs that he sang with his guitar, and all of a sudden they're hearing, you know, Maggie's Farm, you know, I mean, and this was not that they came to hear. But what it did was see that there was dichotomy in youth at that time because the Beatles had become popular. But a lot of kids who were great folk fans of Dylan and Baez and, you know, and Peter, Paul and Mary, and they rejected the electronic music. But when their guy went electronic, they could go electric. They could become part of the crowd. And that's what happened. And that was the beginning and the end of the folk festival.
Right.
Because slowly but surely, because we were building, and at the minute he did that, started, and they had 3 or 4 more years, and they kept getting less and less every year, the young people, because they were going to rock festivals or rock nights, you know.
And there's one more important thing I thought we should touch on. At 2 different times with your festivals, you found yourself right on the forefront of some civil rights issues. Probably most importantly, when you started the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival. And maybe you could talk about that situation with the hotel rooms for Duke Ellington and that whole thing.
Well, I went down to I was invited down in 1962. That was 2 years before they passed the Civil Rights Bill. And they wanted to do I say they, I was invited down there by the Hotel Corporation of America, the Royal Orleans Hotel. And had a meeting in the basement of the little private dining room, and they had the mayor there, and they had the Board of Trade and the Chamber of Commerce and the whole hierarchy of the potential tourist thing for the city of New Orleans. And we had a lovely dinner, lovely lunch, you know, we talked about doing what they wanted to do, and I said, gee, there's nothing I like better than to do a festival. I said, but you have laws on your books that make it very difficult. I said, you don't allow integrated audiences. I said, and our artists have clauses in their contracts they won't play before a segregated audience. So they figured out, well, if we do it outdoors, Kennedy had been down here and spoke to an integrated audience. As long as it was outdoors, we could have an integrated audience. I said, but you don't allow blacks to stay in your first-class hotels. They have to go over the other side of the tracks. I said, Duke Ellington is treated like a king wherever he goes. He's not going to stay in the other side of the tracks. In those days, they used to stay in their own railway car, you know. And I said, no, that we can't change, you know. I mean, I said, you don't allow integrated groups. I said, a lot of our musicians, bands, you know, Duke has a white drummer, Cannonball has a white piano player. I said, they will not give that up. He says, what you can do is you can have a white group and then a black group, but they couldn't play at the same time. Well, so I said, look, I understand your laws. I'm sorry about them. I think they're wrong, but I mean, that's your culture. I was very nice. I said, if it ever changes, I'd like to come back, you know. So, the interesting story, which again is in my book, a year later I come down. They call me back again. There's a chance that they're going to do the festival because the Civil Rights Bill is going to pass, right? They knew that. They told me this. So it was in '64. I got on it. And there was a convention of Catholic priests from the CYOs all over the country. Hundreds of priests, thousands of priests. Well, there were 6 or 7 priests from Pittsburgh where I had done the Catholic Youth, the CYO Festival. So I'm taking these priests out. I'm ushering them. We go to Antoine's for dinner. And they're walking through the room singing John Brown's Body Lies in Glory, Hallelujah. So one of them wants to go to Pat O'Brien's. So Pat O'Brien's one of these places with a courtyard and the room is to the right and you go through and you're in the courtyard. And then when the room is to the right in the little...
I think it's still there.
It's still there, yeah. It's still a big... So we go in the room is full and there's a black waiter there says, sit out here. He was a little rude. He would sit in the courtyard. He says, what do you want to drink? Come in. And so I buy a drink for all the priests, the 6, 7, 8, I can't remember how many there were. And I was having fun. They were all asking me questions about, you know, what did I think of priesthood and priests and stuff like that. And the guy comes there, yeah, there's room in there, now you can go in. I said, give me the check. He said, no check. I thought that either he had, you know, that because they were all priests, they picked up the check. And I said, that's very nice. Why are you buying a drink for the drink? She said, no. He said, you can't buy a drink for me. He said, you don't remember me, but I remember you. I said, what do you mean you remember me? I was going to New Orleans once in my life. He said, when you were down in the Royal Orleans Hotel speaking to all those people about doing a jazz festival, I was the waiter. I heard everything you told those people. He says, you did more for integration than anybody who came down to this city before. I didn't know what was happening. This is not real. It's like medieval times where the serfs were waiting on the king, you know what I mean? And they were listening to every word, and the king wasn't aware that anybody was there. They couldn't have cared less about a black waiter being there. He was listening to every word that was going on. I told them about their own laws, and they got to change. You know, I said, naturally, my thing had nothing to do with the change of integration. It was just part of an overall sweep, which had swept through the whole country. But to that man, that was one of the fascinating moments in my life.
So that is the totality of the recording I have from the great George Wein. Somehow I found one other file. It's extremely short. It was titled Real End to GTW Interview. So I'm going to play that and say goodbye, and thanks so much for listening. I'm glad you shared this with me. Take care.
So did you enjoy being in an interracial relationship? Was there some negative experiences you had along the way?
No. Only positive. Because I was only interested in the people that were my friends, not the people that were my enemies. I couldn't have cared less about them. We had so many friends that believed in us. And they're still my friends, with Joyce Scott, Friendship is the name of the game for me.